Hello, and welcome to a redo. And in today's video, we're going to be playing the polar bear communities once again. I was thinking, well, I played a nation in Zebrica, I played some nations in Griffonia. It's time to head back to Equestria, but what to play? Well, there's apparently some sort of Equus update that's supposed to come out at some point. And, it's not out yet. So I don't want to play any nation that might be in the Equus update. But the polar bear communities were just updated. So I'm kind of just wanting to play them again to, like, why not? So we've already read this, but we're actually not going to go with Waves of Exiles. We're just going to go with the Exiles Return. Let's limit ourselves. That will be a big change that we're doing. Oh, I never put, I also, unlike last run, I have turned on the meme generals. Just because, why not? And this time, we are going to go with, I can still prove I am worthy. We will not yield. We will not surrender. It has been less than a decade, yet once more our clan is pitted against the rest of our kind. But just like the last time, all Father willing, we will not surrender or yield until all polar bears are yet again unified by clan stifling. Such chaos, such devastation. Yet again, we're bears tearing into each other in open war. Even worse than before, Paul Wellington had annulled all duties, alliances, and tyrant-subjugated connections between any and all clans. It was surprising, though, that all the clans had complied to the demand. However, the horror unleashed by the untamed wild boar had torn at the very being. It was the results of all that he had done, all of his mistakes, in front of his clan. He continued looking stern and strong as they gathered for war, but on the holy grounds he felt so weak, so confused. What had he done wrong? He tried to mimic the great emperors Grover the First and Second, sometimes also tapping into the success of liberator Alexander Krimsky. Had these been wrong inspirations? Had he not noticed something integral? Perhaps he should have taken Torben seriously back then, when the Lord of Thunder joked that he had become too griffinized for his own good, too ignorant of clan systems, and too adamant as idea of superiority, that needed allies, not subjects. Perhaps that might have saved him then, but now it seems there is only war. And what do I do now? Well, all we can do, continue the path we have gone upon. The destroyed and sabotaged fish farms have been a bit of an issue we have neglected to address due to ever-increasing issues before the collapse. However, we can't afford to do that any longer. The fish farms all across our own lands must become operational again, so that we may never find ourselves lacking. Forged local alliances. There are many ice forts or even larger fortresses that are inhabited not by any of the great clans, but rather by lesser outcasts, or those whose bloodlines never belonged to any clans. We have previously mostly ignored their interests and part to play in United Bear State. However, that can still be fixed. Storm their fortresses. While most of the Northwest Bear lands are owned and controlled by Clan Skyfling, or bears lacking clan alignment, there are still quite a few locations where the clans of Odalurter or Westlandian clans stretch among what is ours. We must ensure we won't be struck in the back, and thus their castles and forts must fall. They must. Finish the reclamation of the Northwest. Fish are being caught in great numbers again. Larger and larger armies are being raised, and any presence of other clans that presents a danger to us has been eliminated. Now we can march outwards. March, 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 march. We march. Not yet. March west. The fact that there was anything left that could revolt in Eastern Key Lake after the clans that persisted there were pushed out into Changing Lands for their treason is quite surprising. Reclaiming it should not be an issue. I mean, it's 1,000 deaths. That's a bit of a deal. It's not a big deal, but, you know, it's something. Turn our gaze east. Unexpectedly, and perhaps in a surprise to not just us, but everyone across the Bearlands, the three clans of plentiful Westlandia have aligned with each other, forging a sort of alliance of equal. Such a system has never been seen before among the bears, and let's hope that it has faults, for if Westlandia truly rises united, we would simply not have the numbers to stand a chance. Great Alliance of the East. Westlandia has always been the region of polar bear lands, which is the most strange and wondrous for the bears, and perhaps the most normal for most creatures that do not thrive in winter and it's cold. Its forests are plentiful of both berries and game, and stretch on seemingly forever. The game itself is rather more similar to what one would see in normal forests of northern Griffonia, or even Severina, instead of the strange half-magical beasts that roam most of the land. Even the land itself is incredibly fertile, bearing tubers and plenty of other, mostly edible, if bland and long-growing, Arctic plants. Even the northmost sea seems to be more plentiful in fish and seal in the region. Yet despite all this, no great clan or great warlord arose from this land as clans. Instead of growing to eclipse all others, would shatter over access to the best fishing or farming spots. Even in face of potential conquest and annihilation at the claws of Nova Griffonia, expeditions the clans didn't unify, merely reclaiming the huge chunks of lands where griffins had begun to settle as their masters in the west were simply unable to administrate it properly, and turning the would-be conquerors into nothing more than servants for Ursine overlords. Currently, the land is occupied by three clans, Falston, Beakerstock, and Broadcorb, all of which are merely a few decades old, as they were the results of yet another cycle of clan growing in power until it shatters. Though this time it seems it took longer for a unique tradition to develop, as the three clans all use griffin servants and primarily share traditions with the exception of Falson, whose members seem to be fascinated with sea and shipbuilding. Perhaps it's these reasons for why the leaders of these clans managed to so easily agree between themselves to forge an alleged alliance of equals, something that has never been seen before among bears. Similarly worrying are claims that the Triple Alliance desires to usurp power over the bears themselves. We need to tread carefully here. So I want to see both of these events. Attempt negotiation with the Triple Alliance. The so-called Triple Alliance of Westlandia is truly a foe too great to meet on the battlefield. While a position of equals is quite horrible when it comes to negotiations between bears, we can only hope that the Westlandians have taken up a more pragmatic position on such matters from their griffin servants. I guess we can hope. So yeah, I want to see both paths just so I can't see this path because this path is the, we have let all exiles back home. And I'm not doing that this run. Maybe in a future run, I don't know, but not this run. This run I wanted to go with a little more sensible than that. Just a little more sensible. Meeting of four lords. The meeting took place not within a great fortress, not a fort, not even a battle camp, but rather within a simple forest slightly outside of the land controlled by the Westlandian clans. Apparently, the three leaders of the alliance decided that such a point, located close to historically neutral territory, would be the most fitting. That by itself was a worrying sign, as they didn't attempt to amaze Clan Skyfling with some great show of force or brutal implication, rather throwing in an indirect insult, an implication that Paul Wellington never controlled Westlandia and its lords, an attempt at insult and undermining authority far more similar to court jabs of Vedina than anything most bears would do, a worrying development. Yet Paul Wellington had spent time with said noble courts and would not be undermined by a pale imitation. Nevertheless, negotiations took quite some time, and despite the attempt at appearing more civilized and reminiscent of more advanced clans and a seeming misunderstanding of Paul Wellington's intention, negotiations did result in a substantial amount of spilled blood and broken bones, with even Paul Wellington getting a few broken ribs. Yet a final decisive agreement was reached, surprisingly enough, despite the claims of grandeur and even seemingly desire to rule over the entire Versan kind. The Triple Alliance didn't possess much when it came to actual ideas of what sort of name was desired, beyond some basic concepts for the economic and agricultural policy out of all things. Perhaps they had simply not prepared to go that far. That there was always the alternative that being besieged on several fronts, which they most certainly were, prevented any solid plans to be drawn out. Whatever was the case, the three lords agreed to be integrated back into Paul Wellington's domain, as long as their word on what is done, that the Griffin servant caste is final. The line between would-be usurpers and true rulers revealed. That just gives me 20,000 pony power, which is good, which is honestly really good, though it's bear power, not pony power. And I don't know how you'd, mod that in, but I'd love one day for them to actually have it where, Bear Nations, it says Bear Power. Griffin Nations, it says Griffin Power. Pony Nations, it still says Pony Power, but, Minotaur Nations, it's Minotaur Power. It would... That would just be a small detail. I understand why it's not really worth the effort to do, but I'd really like it if they did that. I genuinely would really like that. It would be cool. Alright. Yep. Okay, that's fine, good. Besiege the Triple Alliance. A united Westlandia would crush us easily, yet with how the region is positioned, surrounded on all sides by enemies, be they one of the great bear clans or griffins, they could never fight us as equals, and this one victory will pile on top of another, until we reach the other side of the bountiful Westlandia. Woo! Let's go! Yay! Woo! That's what we want! That's what we want! Yeah! I don't know. just don't question me, okay? Look, I have sanity. I do. You believe me, right? You believe I have sanity, right? Do you believe that? What? Believe it. The walls of ice fall. The push against the Triple Alliance was not something Paul Wellington had envisioned ever would need to be deployed against another bear force. The last time Westlandia was subjugated, it was his force that had united Skyfling and Sporspel's great clans, outmaneuvering and defeating far less numerous enemies. Yet this command was not a lightning-fast march through seemingly barely resisting land. This time it was a slow and brutal grind, with not enough heavy weapon support, and most combat devolving into melee brawls. Whatever artillery or heavy equipment that there was in the Skyfling army was not enough for an engagement that large, as it stretched in pockets, from the very sea to the mountains that designated the border between polar bears and yaks. Yet victory was achieved by Paul Wellington, eventually, and not through a method which any clan would consider honorable, or even remotely traditional, for it was by using weapons which were kept only for cases where extermination was the only true option, anti-dragon rifles of Nova Griffonian production. Only a few dozens of such weapons were available to Clan Skyfling, and they were deemed not be suitable for engaging foreign enemies due to clunkiness, slow rate of fire, and even issues properly aiming such weapons. Yet against the stubbornness of traditional Panzerborch tactics, it was perfect to say the absolute least. And thus it was employed against a tiny part of the Triple Alliance frontier, obliterating several warbands. With such application of localized destruction, the Westlandian clans were left reeling, their lines shattered without any seemingly potential reserves. A repeated last pacification followed, as the lords were forced to lay down their weapons in front of Paul Wellington, and admit their status as subjects. One could only hope that this time Clan Skyfling could build up proper connections, for if Westlandia rebelled once again, there was no telling if victory would be possible. Perhaps we could use the upcoming wars for that. The East is ours. Well, actually, first I want to make sure I have enough to do that. The plentiful and great Westlandia now rests beneath our claws. Despite its recent unification into a force which might have challenged and even defeated us, had All-Father not blessed us, we were the ones who emerged triumphant, against what would in any other case be impossible odds. And this time our grip will persist, for sure. I really want at some point for those guys to actually have their own content. Like, I want to be able to play as the Triple Alliance at some point. I think that would just be cool. And there'd be like 3 paths for maybe like each. Maybe there'd just be 4 paths for that tiny nation, or that tiny path. Like, okay, you could go with this leader, this leader, this leader, or like a unified path. I don't know. On Lartier is an unforgiving land, distant from the nourishing sea and even most rivers or lakes. Through its long history, it has been invaded by changelings, rogueliac warbands, other bear clans, and even a few failed griffin expeditions. No wonder such land has bred 3 entire clans of fearsome warriors. Minor clans of the south. For as long as the oldest scriptures of both bear and foreign origins have recorded, our race has always been one of the warriors and warmongers. We waged war on each other and on yaks and even changelings and griffins, pushed into our frozen realm. We fought them too. Some even say that we have waged war on the land itself, as we had to fight both the climate and the beasts before we tamed even our very homeland. Our very society has been defined by the struggle. Every leader, every influential figure, even the greatest and most revolutionary smiths and scribes have been great fighters, for only through combat can one show the strength of their ideas to their betters. Yet even among a society that glorifies war so much, the 3 clans of Olarter are considered above and beyond when it comes to militarism, for it was them who stood for centuries as a wall against the rogue yak clans and changeling hordes, all while continuing a seemingly internal conflict between each other. It had perhaps been a good thing that the land was a desolate and unfitting to sustain life it came, for had Olarter clans not been the least numerous ones, one of them would certainly overrun the north far before Paul Wellington had returned from exile. Though even with their lacking numbers, the subjugation of Olarter clans was the most difficult of commands during the first unification, and took the entire might of both clans Skyfling and Schwarzpils, something which would be impossible to repeat now. Yet here we are now. Alright. I'm gonna go with, for the actual, but right now let's see these. Clan Khan is a rather strong force, being the only clan whose troops can match the fearsome Schwarzpils in melee combat, perhaps even possessing greater endurance. Subjugating them was hard before, but perhaps a show of good faith and understanding, we can defeat them by word and not claw. Perhaps. Or perhaps not. No. Well, yes, but, you know. No, but actually, yes. Negotiations with Clan Khan. It was It was an outcome the warlords of Clan Skyfling, and especially Paul Wellington, would not have expected. Instead of waiting for an onslaught from superior numbers, Clan Khan had chosen to raise their forces to strike first, and thus the two armies met on a frozen field. Perhaps such a meeting place was the best of the sort of negotiations that happened between Paul Wellington and the Grand Elder Ace. For what better place for two warlords, one potentially on rise and another in seeming decline, than on the field of what could soon be but battle? However, in disappointment to some, the battle would never manifest, for an agreement would be reached. Though in a true bear fashion, quite a few red puddles would soon appear on the light blue ice, and several other diplomats were forced to leave due to broken or even shattered bones, as more difficult disagreements were solved by duels till near death. Even Paul Wellington himself was forced to take on several Khan elders to truly prove the necessity of proper and unified polar bear army, though he couldn't fully show his own competence as Ace of Khan wrestled him to a standstill. The final solution was perhaps not the most satisfactory for either group, but unaltered forces would fight for Clan Skyfling, as long as Paul Wellington upheld his duties as a proper tyrant, allowed them to be led by their own warlords in battle, and took several Pressadorb as military advisors. Not the most exciting way, but negotiation seems to work. A tip: negotiating with Clan Gottlung. Even in the unforgiving lands of Ondalarter, Clan Gottlung was in the worst position, and yet they endured in their great forts and with their great shields. It took a long time to bombard them into submission the last time, though perhaps they don't want their new fortresses bombarded into destiny, and would rather talk it out. Perhaps. Or perhaps not! I'm just gonna keep doing that. Oh, man. Oh boy. Well, please win, Equestria. I really don't want a lunar empire down there, to be honest. Like, I really don't. I don't want to deal with that. What's going on over here? Oh, the Kingdom of Alenia is back. Cool. Negotiations of Clan Gottlung. The walls were larger than before, more prepared, not just ice this time, but stone and even steel. Clan Gottlung hadn't forgotten their humiliation, and they had prepared. Paul Wellington gazed at the fortress seemingly built to stop another Skyfling march against the closest thing Clan Gottlung had to a capital. One could sense the smugness that the Gotling bears radiated, as Paul Wellington, as best Panzerlord, had marched through their admittedly impressive set of fortifications. Through only the cubs, and perhaps some of the more enthusiastic and young warriors would openly show it. It was not the sort of silent, egotistic pride of how griffins would act, and of course not the almost absolutely cub-like and comedic arrogance of ponies. Both of those were tolerable. Yet, when it came to bears, it was almost always a feeling of predatory superiority. A bear that smugly grins at you sees not a defeated adversary or a subpar acquaintance. They see defeated prey, even if it was a merely moral or psychological victory. And with such a mentality spread out among the Gotling Panjort, and perhaps elders, for some time, it seemed negotiations would fail. The final agreement was far more beneficial towards Paul Wellington and Clan Skyfling than they would have assumed from what in another case would be an admitted defeat. Perhaps the way the Khan situation unfolded had convinced the Elder Council of Gotland to rethink their previous position. The agreement was rather simple, if anything, a simple tyrant-subject relationship with one simple demand, that being the elders or potential leader of Clan Gotland, if one would rise to such rank ever again, would be allowed to partake in creation and enactment of new law in order for their autonomy and traditions to be protected. Let's hope such promises don't mount. A tip: negotiations with Clan Rockstarch. The shaman-ruled Clan Rockstarch gazes into the northern winds and channels the power of winter itself like no other. It was only through outmaneuvering and outpowering them that we won, something that took two great clans to complete. Perhaps we can convince them to gaze into the northern winds and see that our fates align. Yeah, all the people leaving. That is all fine. You guys are gonna fight each other. You guys are gonna chill for now, you are gonna chill for now, and you're gonna fight them. With some help, at least. Also, this stays with Equestria. That's interesting. Like, it doesn't go to the Lunar Empire, even though it's on the eastern side. Negotiates with Clan Rockskrites. Polar bears didn't like living on high mountains. The terrain was dangerous, and the winds and storms could overpower even the greatest of Earth signs. Local beasts were similarly dangerous, often being more magical than flesh due to the closeness to the power of northern lights. Yet it was from the top of the tallest mountain in Onalurter that the shaman lord of Rotskrats gazed upon the untamed power within the heavens. The sight of the peak of the mountains was surprising, to say the least. The shaman lord Rotskrats, one who had abandoned their name and existence before achieving such position, was sitting on a throne of ice and bone, almost unprotected, with barely half a dozen others of its order and just a tiny group of Pajorp as guards. It would have been absurd to assume that this was everything. It was hard to imagine where else any other bear would have hidden in such an unforgiving terrain. It was, of course, an attempt to create a sense of power, to potentially intimidate an opponent with the implication that it could be taken down with nothing more than a small warband. Yet while it was somewhat impressive, it couldn't exactly compare to the power plays one would see in Griffonia. Paul Wellington had expected a bit more defiance, aggressive, even absurd demands under threats of unseen forces, perhaps, yet the shaman lord had been mostly compliant and agreeable. Perhaps this had been because Clan Rotskrats had gazed into the winter lights and seen futures where Skyfling had come to crush them, and assumed this was an attempt to demand subservience. Whatever was the case, the final agreement was reached relatively soon. The duties of the tyrant and subject were reiterated and remembered in front of a winter light, so that the divine could hear them this time, and punish the transgressors if one side would break the deal. Something that Paul Wellington was not the most enthusiastic about, yet since performed the deed. But yet still performed the deed. The only thing demanded beyond the traditional duties was that Shaman of Rotshus would accompany Paul Wellington during his campaign and rule as both assistant and observers, something which has yet again promised to the skies. Let's hope All Father is on our side this time. But next time, we're going to go back and go through the middle path and understand that and the true path we are going on some more. But I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell button. And as always, peace.